Generally, there's not a lot of changes this year. There's some changes to electronic things, and they replaced some of the questions with yes, no questions instead of the others, which you would think in theory would be easier, but they're a little, we'll get into them when we do the test survey. Some of them are a little more complicated. We try to pre-fill everything, so hopefully that'll help. Has everybody done this survey before, or are they one new?
No,
person,
I haven't
couple new
either.
people? All right. So kind of the general overview is this is a part of the National Data Collection Program sponsored by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, or IMLS. Every state collects data from public libraries and then submits those data to IMLS. There's 3 different groups that states are in. There's a number of states that are in group 1, and their data collection cycle is just now ending. We're in group 2, so our data collection cycle will start November 4th over here and run until February 15th of 2025. That's when we collect our data. And then there's kind of a cleanup period after February 15th. We get a lot of last minute submissions in the last week, the last day. And so it takes us a while to review those and then clean that up, clean our final data up to get ready to submit to IMLS. We usually do that and publish our data in April, try and do it in April or May. Generally, we like to have ours done a little bit earlier because we use it for the accreditation application. And so even though we don't need to technically submit it to IMLS until the summer, we have to get it cleaned up and published so that we can use it in the accreditation process, because there's peer comparisons there that use the data that you submit on the survey. We're also required by statute to collect an annual report from public libraries. And so this public library survey meets that requirement that we have by statute. And then in group 3, for those national states, group 1, group 2, and then group 3 is 1 state. Any guess as to which state that is?
Texas.
Texas, yeah. Because they have 740 or 750 administrative entities in Texas, so because of the review process with reviewing data when it comes through, and Texas submitted theirs with another group, then they would take them a long time to review all those states. So you'll often hear this survey referred to as a Bibliostat survey. Bibliostat is just a vendor that we use to collect the data. There's 2 different vendors. About half the states use Bibliostat. It's a Baker and Taylor product. And the other half use a competitive product or a different product called Counting Opinions. So you might see that if you're looking at data from another state. The other thing to keep in mind is that when we publish our data, like in April and May, like I said, IMLS is a year behind us. So our most current data is fiscal year 2023 data. We will start collecting fiscal year 2024 data in November in a few weeks when that opens. IMLS published their most current data is fiscal year 2022. So you'll need to keep that in mind if you're looking at their data and doing a comparison across different states, that it's a year older. So a lot of states publish their own. If you're looking for just a comparison, like for us on the accreditation application, we pull Iowa data. We use the most current fiscal year 2023 because they usually publish theirs before we do ours. But just keep that in mind if you're looking, like, I know that may be an issue for you, Teresa, if you're looking at IMLS data and comparing to, you know.
Yeah, we have a hard time
other
finding
states.
peers.
Yeah, and that's always the challenge. When you're up for reaccreditation, usually what we do is we pull the IMLS data first and then look at where that's at. We just did it for Lincoln, and there were like suburbs of Miami that have the same legal service area, and that's not really comparative to Lincoln. So we exclude those and then try and get, geographically similar places, but it's always difficult. So this is kind of the main landing page. You should have gotten an email from me, I think I said yesterday, or maybe the day before, with your login and password, and then a link to the survey login. There's also a few other things, and we'll go through, since we're technically still in the test period, I'm gonna log into your survey, Lori, and we'll just go through that, and we can enter whatever we want, and then they'll clean it before November 4th, so, we'll try and do it that way, log into your survey if that's okay. If you'll notice here, there's a link to the blank survey. Some people like to print that out or just do it in a Word format when you're online, and then log in. And,
I'm sorry.
oh, no problem. And then, enter all your data at once, instead of doing it in the survey itself, like print it out, handwrite it in, and then just enter everything all at once. If you wanna know what changes were highlighted, this year, that's in the second link here. You can print those out too. Survey instructions you can look at here, although those are also embedded within Bibliostat. We'll cover that when we go through the test survey. A lot of questions have a little question mark next to them. You can click on that and a little pop-up will come up with that instruction. For state questions that we added at the state level, those will appear in black on the survey. We can write those definitions to whatever we want to provide. But the federal ones that are in purple, we're stuck with the federal definitions. And so that's kind of a challenge sometime when we're stuck with those definitions. So keep that in mind. And then here's an FAQ about the Bibliostat program. That's also within the program itself. There's a link to that. And then if you wanted to look at those federal questions and how they're defined, there's a link here to those federal questions. And then there's a guide for new directors. Kind of what we're gonna go over today is more in depth than this guide, but if you wanted kind of a general overview, you could look at that guide. And then Overdrive, the good news with Overdrive is if you're in the Overdrive consortium, we pre-fill all that stuff for you. You don't have to worry about it. But if you wanted to know how we got those numbers, we have two guides here, and those are not updated yet this year because Deborah just pulled those pre-filled numbers, and I don't think she's updated these yet because Overdrive is changing things all the time. So she tries to wait until about the time of the survey launch and then update that. But if you wanted to know how she pulled those reports, say you wanted to do it once a month or a couple times a year instead of look at it every year, you could, that's how she does it. Any questions at the outset? Let's log into the test survey, see if we can get in. For browsers, we have a new version of Collect. They rolled out a new version with, I think, some good features and some features that not necessarily bad, but that we might not really use much. They still do recommend Chrome as the browser, but supposedly the new version is, will fix some of that browser, some of those browser issues that they had before, but they always recommend Chrome first, Firefox second. They don't tend to recommend Edge. If you're using IE, I don't think that's supported either. I don't know, most people probably aren't using that. So let's go ahead and log in. If you have questions when we go through this, it's best to just not wait until the end, just raise them when we go through the survey, that way we can address that. So let's see. So you just enter your password, and most of the password login issues, these all use numbers and not capital O's. So I would say 99% of any login issue is if somebody accidentally enters a capital O instead of a 0, because they kind of look alike. I would go with that first, and if that doesn't solve the problem, you can email me, or there's a contact number for Bibliostat, you can call them. They're in New Jersey, so there's a little bit of a time change, but they're usually pretty good about responding to emails. I usually get responses the same day, most of the time, or you can also call them as well. Our rep's name is Keisha Cole. She would be the one that would answer if you called or emailed.
And if anyone's emailed Sam, you know, he's very
I
responsive
tried
too.
to. So when you log in now, you'll notice the background's a little bit different, and the up at the top, it's a little bit different also. You still have your survey list, which will still show the current survey here, the 2024, and you can continue to start it or look at the status of it. We now have an export to Excel feature. That wasn't there before. We could just print to an HTML or print to a PDF. Now we have an export to Excel. I haven't really looked at that too much yet. It looks like maybe the headers need to be worked on a little bit and changed around, but that'll be nice. I think in the long run, once we get those bugs worked out. And then if you scroll down, you can look at your other surveys. These are all locked. but you can always print them, or now you can export to Excel also. Going back to 2001, if you're looking for something before that, we have them on paper. Just give me a call, I can pull those. And I don't know if 2001 was when we started using Bibliostat. I assume it probably was, but I'm not positive. Supposedly, the print feature, I've played around with it a little bit. I know there was a problem with the HTML on the PDF. The PDF didn't work. I think that's fixed now. I didn't have any issues with it when I was doing
Went in
testing.
this morning and printed mine.
Did it print okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe that's fixed. Hopefully it's fixed.
Okay.
So here's a link to that FAQ that we talked about earlier, the help, and then the contact number. So now we have a new button here called the dashboard. This is one of those features that I don't think is really helpful. You can click on this, and it's gonna show you like the total number of questions, the number of errors that you had in your survey. Those will show up in the survey itself. And then kind of where those errors appear in the survey and how much completed you are. I don't know if that's super helpful. You might want to look at it at the end, but I didn't think it was too helpful for me anyway. So let's go ahead and click on continue. That'll take us into the survey itself. So now this is something new too. And I think this was something that they added because there were issues with data getting changed in some states that allowed multiple people to access the survey at the same time. And so this is their way of kind of tracking who made the changes and when. So if they could go back and look and say, well, actually, Teresa was in the survey Saturday and changed that question. So it's kind of like more of a tracking thing. Although I think you could enter pretty much anything here. But I'll just enter my name here since I'm the one that's working on the Madison survey.
So
today.
Sam, does that show up every time somebody goes into the survey to make a change, the contact details?
I think when you log in the second time, if you've already entered one person, like if you entered, like if I entered myself here
Right.
today, it'll have a button with my contact will come up. I won't have to enter it the second time, but I'll have to verify that it was me that logged in.
And if it's a different person, then they have to enter the
update it
details.
or edit
Okay.
it, yeah. I think it was New York. New York was having issues with data being overridden. Oops. And so I think that was their way of kind of tracking that, so that they could go back later and look at kind of history of things too. So you notice here, kind of basic navigation is the same. We have our survey navigation bars on the left, broken down into the various sections of the survey. General data, library facility, finance, library collections, services, technology, staffing, the narrative, and then the final certification at the end. So if you logged in and you wanted to go like to say to part 5, you could always navigate over there if you didn't want to page through each section. But in our case, we're starting at the beginning. So I found it helpful to kind of collapse this because I think it shows a little bit better on the screen. So I like to keep that collapsed, but if you wanted to navigate, unless I'm navigating to like part 6, I can expand it and then just run over there. We still have this over here in this corner. We still have to show last year's answers and hide last year's answers. That's helpful. I would always recommend putting on show last year's answers because then you can look at what you entered last year. And it's helpful because your data should vary a little bit from year to year, but not be exactly the same in most circumstances. But if there's a wide variance, you can say, well, I think maybe I entered something incorrectly, or maybe I need to look at that. Or that might trigger an edit check. And we'll get into edit checks in a little bit. You'll also notice here, we still have the same flag button. The flag is more for like a reminder for you when you're going through the survey. Like if you wanted to flag a question, say you forgot to add something to the number that you've entered that's on your sheet that when you're typing it in, And you wanted to flag it so that when you got later on to enter the survey, it would be a reminder to say, oh, I have a flag question, I need to add something to that number. Or that was incorrect, or something like that. It'll just pop up as a reminder at the end when you go to submit it. There's also the note field. We always recommend that in the note field would satisfy an edit check, and what an edit check is it looks at the data that you entered compared to last year, and then it looks at other things like ratios. Like say you entered $1 million for your revenue, but your operating expenditures were like $50,000. It would say, hey, that's a large variance, and then would want to know why there's that large variance. And so you can enter a note for that question that would satisfy the edit check, like maybe you got a ton of revenue and didn't spend it during that fiscal year and it carried over into the next one. I always recommend that kind of wait until you get an edit check before you enter a note, because like less information is better than too much information. Because they might look at the note and then say, well, you didn't have an edit check, but you have this note. So then they'll ask follow-up questions, like when we submit your data to MLS.
I have a question about notes.
Yeah.
Okay, I usually leave a note for myself so that the next year I know where to find that information, like, you know, ask Mike about kids' event
Right,
stats.
sure.
And I know that, I usually have to like copy and paste that note from year to year.
Yep.
It's not because I know that there's 3 different,
Right, so.
So I usually-
Note, yeah.
yeah,
The
so
note field.
even if I put it under local, is that going to make people,
No,
okay,
we only submit the federal notes.
okay.
So in your case, that's a perfect example of like a local note.
Mhm.
So you would want to enter that here in the local. If you just click on that, you notice how it went blue. And if it's the same one from last year, you can look at your last year's note and just do a control C and a control V and copy it into that local note. If it's a purple question and you got an edit check, you will want to enter that in the federal note field, because that'll then satisfy that federal note.
Mhm.
If you got an edit check and it's a black question, so a state question, enter that in the state note field. And then what you described is a perfect example of a local note where you got that in a local note. We now have real-time edit checks. So if you remember last year, and we'll show an example of that, will pop up when we get to probably the revenue part, it's good example. If you notice last year, you enter all your survey data and you get to the end and you look at your edit checks and it says, oh, you got an edit check for this or that. Like revenue, like the example that we gave for revenue. We now have real-time edit checks, so if you get an edit check for that question, it'll pop up on the right-hand side of the screen. And you can then enter a note for that question, which I think is a helpful thing, because if you're doing the survey over multiple weeks, you may forget about that question in revenue while you're working on the rest of the survey. And so if it pops up when you're entering it, then you can just enter a note right there and be done with that edit check. This little I here, this is that, when we talked about logging in as, you know, like I logged in as myself. So if I change answers, it will then, if you hover over this, it'll say last modified by me, and then today's date and whatever time we modified that. So that may be helpful too. If you have multiple people on your end logging in the survey, you can see who logged in and modified something. I think that's really rare. I don't know of a lot of libraries that do that. Generally, it's usually just one person logs in and does the survey. We also have this button here. You notice this history button. This is something new. So you can then click on history and it'll show you, you know, back a few years, back 5 years, what you've entered for that particular question. That may be helpful if you're looking at kind of things, you know, historically, but not necessarily just the prior year. In part 1, you'll notice that, well, it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but these fields are grayed out and we cannot change them. They're pre-filled and locked.
Mhm.
Generally, that's because in part 1 and part 2, 90% of the questions there are things that don't change. Like your library name usually doesn't change, your street address doesn't change. There's a lot of codes that are entered. Those don't change from year to year. If for some reason your street address did change, library square footage changed, you legally changed your name, just contact me. We had that issue with OPL.
Yeah.
I think a couple of years ago, when there was some movement around and we had to add branches and delete. Just contact me and I can make those changes for you. We usually like to keep them locked because, like, say you changed street to ST here, that would then trigger an edit check. And so, if there's something that is incorrect that we do need to change, just send me an email and I'll just go in and make that change for you. Bellevue, I think, is one that has a new address. They had a new library, so when the survey launches, I'll go in and, change their street address, and I think they have probably new square footage too, and we'll enter that for them. Here's an example of that little question mark, like if you wanted to look at the definition, you can click on that and then it'll pop up with more information about how to answer that question. Like in this case, you would enter your post office box, otherwise you enter your street address. So it may be pre-filled with your street address if you don't have a PO box. If it has a street address and you do have a PO box, let me know and I'll go in and change it. Okay, so these are all pre-filled and locked. These are grayed out. System will be pre-filled with Three Rivers and locked. A couple words about population. Those are also pre-filled and locked. We are required to use the population numbers that come from the state data center, which is UNO. And they use they recognize the ACS 5-year estimates. So those come out in July. Those are the numbers that we get and pre-fill for you. In most cases, the local population is going to be the same as your legal service area, with a few exceptions. Sometimes, like Omaha is a good example. So for Omaha, since you serve Douglas County, you'll see the population of Omaha, the city here, and then population of your legal service area would be Douglas County. Generally, that's the case with libraries serve that larger area. There's a few that serve multiple townships, so we pulled the population from those townships that are served and then add them all up and then put them in and pre-fill it for you. But if you do have questions, let me know. I can look at the back end spreadsheet. Or if for some reason that changes, Columbus is an example. They used to serve Platte County. They no longer serve Platte County. I think that was a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. So we reduced their population. Okay, so again, we always recommend that you save the page before you click next. That was another fix that supposedly happened with this new version. If you click next, it's supposed to save the data of the page that you're on. I don't trust it. I always click save. A lot of people have reported in the previous version that they've paged through the survey and certain pages haven't been saved. I don't know if that's happened to anyone here. It's a little extra insurance to just hit save and then next. Like I said, that is supposedly one of those known issues that is fixed with the new version, but I would always recommend clicking save. And then you'll notice here, there's an arrow down here at the bottom too. If you wanted to page up, you could click on that. That's something new. Takes you up to the top. I don't think that was in the old version of Collect. So let's just click on next because we're just in a test survey here. We don't need to worry about saving anything. Branch libraries and bookmobiles. Does anybody, other than Omaha, does anybody have a branch location or a bookmobile? Okay, so you wouldn't have to worry about that. If you do have one, it's going to be that record. Those records will come up the same as whatever it was last year. If there's changes to that, like say you added a bookmobile or deleted one, let me know. I'll go in. I can go in and change those for you. The year the facility was built. And then we have a few questions about renovations. Year of the latest renovation. These are all state questions we collect at the state level. Kind of if you're doing a renovation or you're thinking about a renovation, you want to get in touch with somebody else that, I don't know, Fremont, I don't know if you had anybody contact you saying, we're thinking about doing something. I noticed that you were through the process a couple of years ago. Who'd you use for an architect? How did you like them? And so on and so forth. you have a question?
Sam, does that include where we had the mold and then we redid, does that count as a renovation or?
I would say that's not a major renovation.
Okay,
I would say a major renovation is if you built a new building, added on to it.
okay,
Um,
so we won't.
did a complete remodel, like something like that, yeah.
Okay.
If you had mold and address that issue and then just replace the carpet or something like that, I would.
It was closed for over a
Did you?
year.
Okay. Well, you can put that on there and then I would put a note in the note field, the state note field, like indicating what you did. We had mold and took out a wall of the, you know, and
Okay.
however you want to describe it.
They take out,
I think that would be helpful to put a note in
did they
there.
take out all the walls?
They didn't take out all the walls, just,
We took out, all the north walls and this building over here and over there and all the, east wall.
all effective ones.
Yeah, and the ball affected as well.
Yeah, so I would probably put that date in there. Did that happen last year?
Yeah,
They were closed over a year, so that's pretty
So
major.
2023 and then put that in the note field,
okay,
kind of describing what you did.
okay.
It's good for historical record.
Good idea. Mhm.
So then other questions about, are you working on a project? Is construction underway? What's the completion date? And then you'll notice beginning in part 2 here, all of these are pre-filled and locked. You'll notice a lot of codes, IDs, things like that. You'll notice here, there's a gap between 2.20 and 2.24. Those are the ones that you'll wanna, enter data for, and I think it's hours and weeks open, so we'll scroll down to that. And for each outlet, so like OPL, you know, that for each outlet, you enter the number of hours, number of weeks open, and then it totals that,
Sure.
for you, but if the rest of you just have the one library location, your central library is your own, you don't have an outlet, a branch or a bookmobile or anything like that, you just enter it once. So 2.22 here is where you'll want to enter your hours. And you'll notice here, this is the thing to keep in mind. Minor variations need not be included. Extensive hours closed due to natural disasters or other events should be excluded from the count. So if we use as your example, say, with the mold, say you were closed for a month, you would exclude those hours from what you report here. If for some reason that only caused you to be closed for a couple days, that would be like a minor variation. Minor variations usually are like you closed for the day or you closed early because you had a snowstorm, or your air conditioner went out in the summertime and it was 100 degrees, so you closed the library in the afternoon.
Plumbing issue, something like that.
Something like that. that
Closed
caused a
to come to this
minor
workshop.
variation, yeah, or just a day or two. You would still include those hours here. But if you were closed like, for like more than a week, you know, for something major, like you had your flooring replaced or the mold, things like that, you would exclude those from the count here. And same thing with weeks open, that's in 2.23. Most people, it's gonna be 52 unless you close for the holiday and it might be 50. You would exclude those weeks if it's, like due to a natural disaster or major one-time event. And you'll notice here throughout the survey, this remove group and add group, it's more applicable like in the revenue, but the reason that it's here is like, say you did add a bookmobile, you would want to add the group and then add that bookmobile, or a branch location. That's why it appears here. But we'll show you a better example of that in the revenue part that,
Sam,
when we get to that. Yeah.
So like we're closed for holidays like Thanksgiving, Thursday, Friday. Exclude or include?
I would say that's a minor variation, just in a couple of days.
Alright,
So I would include those. It's like if you're normally open 10 hours a week and you're just closed Thursday and Friday, I would, for hours, I would report 520, 10 times 52, if you're open 52 weeks. Again, more codes here, structure codes, just those will be pre-filled and locked. If you have questions, you can always contact me and we can pull the federal definition about these codes. Geographic code, I think that changed last year. This now aligns with census code. So if you're looking at census data and you wanted to compare, like that would be applicable, what we talked about earlier, Teresa, like if you're pulling IMLS data and comparing Omaha to, another library, in the United States, you may want to look at geographic codes and kind of make sure that you're looking at the same
Okay, so
one.
they now align with the census code?
Yeah, so that they,
Okay.
because that aligns with PL one, I think, as a place. And then there's some other definition for it. But PL stands for place, I think, is the code.
We'll play around with that and see what it looks
I
like.
think they used to have the others that were city or, they also have, locale codes in the data. And generally those are like rural, remote, rural town, rural city, you know, and then, metropolitan areas, suburbs, so on and so forth. Sometimes we look at those if we're looking at peers too, because, you know, like we want to make sure that those kind of try and align.
Okay.
And I think that's a different question on the survey or it's, built somehow. So then you'll notice in 2.31, that's the sum of those hours that we entered. Let's go back and enter something here. How many hours a week are you open here, Madison? 20, 10?
We're open from 11:30 to 7.
You're gonna make me do math, aren't you?
Yeah.
Let's just say, for example, you're open 10 hours a week, because that's easy.
Okay, that sounds good.
So that'd be 520. And let's say you're open, every week, 52. We'll go down here and, since it's a calculated field, we'll need to hit save to have that appear in 2.31. Let's go ahead and save that.
Hmm.
That doesn't look good.
Oh, that's major frustration.
That's me.
But it reaffirms to everyone, oh, it's not just me.
Yeah,
Happened right here on tape.
it happens.
Let's hop back over to part 2. Scroll down. Save that page for us. So let's enter it again. Here's an example of those real-time edit checks that we were talking about before. So here you'll notice, question 2.27 is does your library meet the FSCS definition? And what that is it's a federal definition of a public library, which is different than how we define a public library in the state. They define it as you have to have paid staff, open hours, organized collection of materials, I think one other thing.
Like board members.
No, that's a state requirement.
Okay.
The federal one is a little bit different. And you'll notice here, it's throwing up an edit check. It's saying you entered yes here because we did last year, refilling from last year. But your total staff expenditures are 0 because that's one of the requirements.
Oh,
is
they
paid staff.
require paid staff, yeah.
And so the reason that comes up is because we haven't gotten to the financial part yet. So here's an example of, you would want to ignore this until you entered your financial information, and this is gonna go away. Now, if you read this and it related to whatever you add here, then you'd want to enter a note then to satisfy that edit check. But in this case, we're gonna ignore it because the reason it's there is because we haven't entered any. And I asked them if we could turn this off for just this question, because this is kind of confusing. So I said, can we turn this off? And she said that she would, pass it on to the developers and see if we can turn it off for just this question and have it appear at the end. For those few libraries that didn't meet the definition. Haven't heard back from them yet, so we'll see. You'll notice here, then here's that calculated field 520. And there it appeared without saving it. So maybe it's one of those things where it will appear without saving it. Generally, in the past, you had to hit save for those calculated fields to appear. So maybe this is something new also that we're working on. So let's go next. And that should take us to the finance section. Any questions about those first 2 parts? A lot of those are codes, just leave them, it's pre-filled. So part 3 starts with your fiscal year. For most people, it's gonna be October 1 through September 30th, that's the federal fiscal year. Or the state fiscal year is July 1 through June 30th. It'll be pre-filled with whatever you had ended up with last year. Generally, that doesn't change. If for some reason that's incorrect, I've had it happen a few times where a new director came in. And actually, they talked to their city person and that was not the correct fiscal year. If that is the case, I think you can go ahead and change this. It's gonna trigger an edit check. You would enter a note saying that it was entered incorrectly last year. But generally, these are correct. Just leave them. And then revenue. Almost here in 3.3, we enter our city or village revenue. Let's say that there was a slight variance that went down to $93,000. Just enter that here. Again, you can click on that little question mark if you want to know, kind of that question definition. Township name, does anybody get money from townships or counties?
County.
Okay, so county is probably a little bit better example. So say you didn't get anything from a township, just enter an NA and a 0 here. But let's say you got money from a county. Which county do you get funding from?
Antelope.
Antelope, okay. So you just enter Antelope here. And then, do you know about how much money you get from them?
We just got it, 3,000,
Let's just say 3,000.
okay.
So you just enter that like that. Antelope County and then $3,000. If you had gotten money from more than one county, like Antelope County and,
Madison.
Yeah.
Tilden gets
Tilden
both.
gets, yeah.
that's where this add group comes into play. So you can then click on the add group. And you see how now we have a 3.6 up here for Antelope County, and then we have another one down here for Madison County.
Which is like 10,000, right?
Yeah, ours is 10,000.
So we would then enter Madison County, and then if they got $10,000, we'd enter that here. Just like that. If you had another county, just click on the add group again, and so on and so forth. If you clicked on that accidentally, just delete this out. And click on the remove group, and it'll go away. That's how the repeating groups work. Okay? You'll see that throughout the survey, usually in the revenue section, is most applicable. So in here we have a total. Well, actually, no, we have the other section. This is really rare that you would get money that didn't come from the city. There would be another local government entity. If by chance you do, just enter a description here and then the amount here. I don't know if I can think of any examples where something wouldn't come that would be like your city revenue. If it was like a one-time grant from another federal or another local agency, maybe like a power district or something, that's the only thing I can think of that you would report here. That wouldn't be like your normal operating revenue. So then we'll see some totals here, total local government revenue. Whenever, we can have Bibliostat do the math for us, we'd like that. When they do the math, then we don't have to worry about that. So this is the $93,000 that we entered for local government revenue, and then the 3,000 that we entered from Antelope County here.
I have a question. What if we don't get any money from the village?
Just the county, you mean?
Oh, yeah,
So if you just got money from the county,
we have to have money raisers all the time.
okay.
But
so-
they do pay your insurance and utilities.
Yes.
So there
do we
is
count
some,
that?
yes.
Oh,
Yeah, you would
Oh.
include that. So if they directly pay like insurance, utilities, so on and so forth. You would report that in that 3.3 local
oh,
government, yeah.
Mhm.
And then we'll get to those fundraisers in a minute. That's in the other section. But yeah, for the local government, if they pay it directly, or pay the rent directly, utilities, so on and so forth, then that would be, you would enter that in 3.3. Another question back in the back?
When you were talking about the grant from the other entities, like the power groups or whatever, is there a minimum
Yeah,
or just any amount?
no, any amount.
Okay.
If it comes from another local government agency, like I said, that's really rare. It doesn't usually happen. Generally, if you get funds, it comes from the city in the form of your budget. And the other thing for revenue, you report the money, the funds that are available to you, not necessarily what you spent. You report what you spent in the expenditures part. This is not an accounting program. It's not gonna look at what you entered for revenue and try and balance that to the dollar of the expenditures. In fact, that would be unusual for everything to balance out to the dollar. So generally speaking, in the revenue section, there's some exceptions, but a lot of the time, we expect to see nice round numbers there, like the 3,000 from Antelope County. And then maybe you don't spend, that to the dollar, maybe it's like 2,900 or something like that. So the expenditures, we like to, it's more, common to see not round numbers in the expenditures part and see those more so in the revenue part. Because generally that's like your budget is a nice round number. With some exceptions, not always the case. So state government revenue down here, if you receive state aid through us, if your library is accredited, that'll be pre-filled. It looks like last year. Looks like last year, or this year, you got the same amount that you did last year, 1,216. If your library is not accredited, and you do the survey online, you're eligible for a grant from us for $200 called Dollars for Data. It's kind of like the first step to become accredited. That'll be pre-filled if you received that last year, that Dollars for Data amount. Then we have grants, continuing education and training grants, those use state funds. We don't pre-fill those because we would have to pull, the number for when you were paid and then align that to your fiscal year. And that would be kind of difficult because everybody has kind of different fiscal years, so, we leave that up to you to fill in. If for some reason you don't know or you can't remember, does everybody know about our grants database on our website? Let me show you that real quick, because I think that's helpful for other reasons too. You can go to our website and just type in grants database. You click on enter, and you notice here, it's the third one down. Grants recipients database, you see that? You can select a grant, select a year, select a library or a city. And so in this case, let's just select Madison. We'll look at what grants you received over the years. This will show all the grants you've received. And so you'll look here. It looks like there's a collaborative grant given in 2000 for a bunch of libraries that collaborated with you. And then it kind of gives a grant amount here, which grant that was, and then kind of a description of what the project was here. That can be helpful, like if you're looking at, you want to know what other libraries did, you can do a search like that. Or if there's neighboring libraries, you want to look at what grant funding they got. Continuing education and training grant was given in 2003. Looks like those same libraries, Madison County Library Association. And then in 2019, you got an internship grant for $1,000. So list all those, CARES Act grant, so on and so forth. That's kind of helpful if you're looking at other libraries. Doesn't give you the date that you're paid, so for the survey, but something that might be helpful if you're looking at writing a grant, you want to do a search of similar projects, maybe. Youth grants, those also use state funds. You would enter that amount here. And then we have the other state government revenue. Generally, those are internship grants. It's uncommon for libraries to receive money from state government agencies that aren't the Library Commission. But if for some reason that did happen, you would just enter that amount here. You got money from something else that was state government revenue. Then we have the totals down here. Federal government revenue, the most common one would be federal library improvement grants. So the library improvement grants that pass through us come from federal funds. So that's why it's reported as federal revenue, because we're just a pass-through agency. And then if there's another federal grant source here, again, this is like that repeating group, you just enter the source here and then the amount here. And 3.17 and 3.18. That's kind of unusual too. I think one example might be USDA had some grants a few years back. I don't know if they're still offering those. You would just enter USDA and then,
Would the ALA, Library Improvement, or Library
ALA
Transform
would,
Communities?
because it's not a federal government agency,
Okay.
you would enter that and we'll get to that
Okay.
next. That's in the other part. Is that what's your question? Yeah. If it was an IMLS grant, IMLS does have some national leadership grants. If you receive one of those, you can just put like IMLS national leadership grant in the description and the amount. Those would be like the most common ones, I think. It's rare that occurs though. Most of the time it's gonna be an NA and a 0 for most people. So then in the next section, that should be the other. Scroll up here, we have our total federal government revenue. And then we have the other section that's, anything that's not state government, federal government, or city government. Would go in this other category. Lender compensation, if you receive lender compensation, you would enter that here in 3.20. Does anybody well, Omaha would, does anybody besides Omaha?
Do you pre-fill that or do we go and look it up?
We don't pre-fill it. but,
Okay.
If you do, here's another one that you can easily get from our website. You can just type in lender compensation. And then you'll notice here, this is like the fourth one down.
Okay.
And then if you scroll down on this page, it has the quarterly reports here. So you just pull those 4 quarterly reports and then align it to your fiscal year. So you would then just click on this. It pulls up this report. So let's look at Fremont. That's Laura sitting over here. So for Fremont, these are the numbers. Go back to the header here. The first one is overdrive loans and what you were paid for the overdrive loans. Those are the electronic ones. And then the OCLC loans, those would be like a paper copy of a book that you sent out to another library. So you would just report the total amount. So in this case, for that quarter, you received $1,177.58. So you would add that to the other 3 quarters and then report that under the lender column.
Okay.
So you just, on this, like you would just do the totals of that whole thing on each of
Yeah.
the 4 quarters.
Yeah. Because the first column is the overdrive loans.
Right.
It looks like they had a little over 8,450 overdrive loans. This must be electronic books that you purchased and then shared back with the consortium.
Can you scroll down a little bit and see if Pierce, I
We
know
are
you
on
have
there,
the
we're like right at the
advantage,
top.
Reed Pierce?
Yeah.
Yeah, you had $98.46. So
cause you have the overdrive advantage.
you had 758 overdrive loans and then you had
There's
3
a lot more
OCLC
than that.
loans. The reason that this is offered is kind of like to encourage lending amongst libraries, so, because to pay for at least the postage. Or for the overdrive loans, to encourage you to buy something and then share it back to the consortium so anybody can use it. It's not a huge reimbursement, but kind of somewhat of an incentive.
No, I think it works out to about $3,000 a year for us.
Does it? Let's see what yours was.
I think my.
For this quarter, it was, for Omaha Public, it was $607.50. And then you'll notice here, there's also academic institutions here, like Northeast Community College had one. Nebraska Wesleyan University, they had 81 during the school year. Okay, back to the survey.
I have a
Yeah,
question.
question.
I'm gonna back up a little with other revenue.
Okay.
If you have a foundation that gives you money on a quarterly basis, that would go in here.
Yep, so the first one's lender comp and then regional library system grants. These would be money, like if you get money.
Right, if you go to
systems for a
conference or
workshop
something.
Something like that, you would enter that 3.21. And then 3.22 is the other. So like in your case, say you got $1,000 from your foundation. You could enter this just as foundation. And then $1,000 here. And then you'll see here, that's another one of those repeating groups. I don't really care. We have some libraries that like itemize everything, like $50 for copies, $100 for meeting rooms if they charge for that. Foundation, fundraisers, I don't really care if you wanna combine these, you can separate it by comma. Foundation, friends, copies. This, however you wanna, whatever you wanna say. Or you can always just put C note. If you have a lot of them and it doesn't fit in that box,
Okay, I have another
you
question.
can do it that way as well.
Say your village received a grant through economic development. But it was the village, the entity that received the grant, but it's like on behalf of the library for something that you're doing at the library.
So
Like we
the,
received a CCCFF grant
yeah, so.
and,
It's just, the city's just a pass-through agency, or it's just passing through the city's
well,
bank account.
they made the commitment to, put up the match for it.
Okay,
So do we ignore that and just
No, I
say
would
that's
report it.
village stuff?
you probably could report it, yeah.
We should report
Yeah,
it?
and it may be one of those things, it's common. For you to report revenue one year and expenditures the next year, so say that money was received in this fiscal year. You would report it on this survey, and then you spend it next year, you would report the expenditure next year.
Okay.
Um,
What if our budget was never increased to show that amount? Because they figured, if you understand what I'm saying, they gave us our budget
Yeah,
amount.
let's talk during the break about
Okay.
that, okay? I think I can clarify a little bit better.
Okay,
Yeah, so again, if you wanna itemize a lot of these, I have a couple libraries, one in Southeast Library System that itemizes everything. They have like 10 repeating groups, cause they just like to do it that way. That's fine. When we publish our data, we combine them. We'll put the description and then just the total other. But it may be helpful for your end, on your end, to itemize them.
So a lot of
Sometimes
basic,
people itemize them in the note field too, and you can do that. Well, yeah.
So if my friends buy all of my summer reading prizes for $5,000, is that other revenue?
I would probably put it under other revenue, yeah.
Thank you.
or any basic grants like IEEE or the,
Yeah, or like your NLA example. You would
Yeah.
just enter NLA grant here, and then, Dollar General, common one. Usually it's like donations from a friends group, fundraisers, foundations,
Okay, I have another
copies,
question about,
fax machine.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
So I have another question about foundation money. Usually I ask my foundation for specific things. They don't give me like a quarterly stipend or anything like that. It's like I need
Right. So,
display cabinets.
so you wouldn't even report that here.
Okay, because that's,
money
oh,
doesn't
because it's
touch
not revenue.
Right.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
But you said any fundraisers you do go in that other.
Yeah, like if you had a bake sale or something and you had like raised $200 or whatever, you would put it here. If people donate books, that's kind of like an in-kind contribution, you don't really put a value on that. You don't report it here.
Thank you.
Okay,
Does
so
that make sense?
what about, we get checks from different people, I mean, the city association check, each one of them, or can I put them all
Put
together?
them all together and then just put in the description like memorials.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, that's kind of like what people do usually, or donations works too, yeah. However you wanna describe it. But yeah, you don't need to itemize each one, just put a total.
These are checks that people just give the library, is that what you're talking about?
yes,
Yeah, like a donation.
Donations.
Or oftentimes it comes from a memorial.
Yeah.
Somebody passes away and they say, well, they were a frequent library user, we're gonna donate, for this or that.
right.